I didn't really like my father very much. He worked in construction, and because of his job, he rarely had days off. He would always leave for work in his dirty work clothes. By the time he returned home, those clothes would be even filthier. Not only that, his hair, face, and even the palms of his hands would be covered in dirt and mud. As soon as he came home, he'd immediately strip off his dirty clothes at the entrance and head straight to the bath. When I was little, I'd seen him do this and tried doing the same thing a few times myself. However, whenever I did, my mother would scold me, and I eventually stopped doing it. Despite this, it seemed like my father was allowed to do it without any repercussions. Even when I was a child, I felt that this was unfair, and as I grew older, I realized how inappropriate his behavior was. There were also times when I'd bring friends over, and he would walk around the house completely naked without any regard for them. I was extremely embarrassed and grew to dislike my father even more. After such incidents, I started telling my father, albeit a bit strongly, "Please take off your clothes in the bathroom." However, it seemed like he had no intention of listening to me, and he would just laugh it off, saying, "My bad, my bad." The next day, he was doing the same thing again. Friends who had met my father always had something to say about him. Thankfully, it wasn't bullying.
Your dad's quite the character, isn't he?
I knew my friends didn't mean any harm when they said that, but to be honest, I hated hearing it. Judging by his outgoing personality, they probably thought he was the kind of fun-loving dad who would take them out on adventures. But that was far from the truth. After all, I'd never once gone out to play somewhere with my dad. Listening to my friends, it seemed common for their families to go out together on Sundays. As I watched them talk enthusiastically about their outings, I think to myself, I wish I could go out somewhere too. In elementary school, I even brought it up to my mom, but she'd always respond with,
Your father is just too busy.
To make up for it, she'd play with me, but since she didn't have a driver's license, we couldn't go far. My dad definitely seemed to work from early morning till late at night, rarely taking a day off. And his days off were irregular. Sometimes he had off on rainy days, but he mostly stayed home. On those days off, he would usually spend his time lounging in front of the TV, drinking alcohol from morning. This image might well fit the stereotype of a neglectful father. I've seen dramas featuring such fathers several times. Most of the time, those fathers were portrayed as failures. My dad, at least, never raised his hand to anyone, which might be a saving grace. But that doesn't make it any less disheartening. Given this, it's inconceivable that he would ever go out and play with me. But looking back, I wonder if my disdain for him during those times was partly a reaction to my loneliness. Of course, that feeling of loneliness mainly was when I was younger. By the time I reached middle school, I had fully come to terms with my circumstances. I no longer wished for him to play with me, and I certainly didn't want to see my dad, often disheveled or nude, every time I looked at him. One rainy day, as it turned out, my dad had a rare day off. As usual, he was lounging in front of the TV with a drink. I was studying in the living room. Since the TV was located there, it was inevitably in my line of sight. Well, can't be helped, I thought resignedly, and continued my exam preparations. Then, suddenly, my mom suggested to my dad,
The rain has stopped. Why not go out with Daniel for a change?
Her words took me aback. Mom had never suggested anything like that to my dad before. I was about to say, I have to study. It's okay, but I was curious about what my dad would say, so I just listened. To my surprise, he turned to me and asked, chuckling,
Hi, Daniel, is there anything you want to do with me?
I was caught off guard and could only muster a confused, huh. Though there were times when I wished we could go somewhere together, I hadn't settled on any particular place, and those feelings were from when I was much younger. Now, being asked directly made me feel embarrassed, and my mind went blank. Without thinking, I responded, I'm better off alone. Besides, I'm studying for my exams now. Hearing that, my dad laughed heartily and remarked,
I guess it wouldn't be fun for you to hang out with me, huh?
I didn't react, or perhaps I couldn't, because what he said hit the mark. At that moment, I genuinely believed I wouldn't have fun with him. Inwardly, I wished, if only he had asked when I was younger, but I saw no point in voicing that thought. All I could do was stay silent. After a while, my dad said,
I'm out of booze. I'm going to the convenience store to get some.
And he left. Left alone in the living room, my mom turned to me and said,
I didn't phrase it well. I'm sorry.
I was surprised by her words. Had she been concerned all along about the loneliness I felt? Maybe she had been trying to find the right moment for my dad and me for years. It's okay, I replied. I don't want to spend time with Dad now. Anyway, it wasn't bravado. It was indeed how I felt, but my mom still looked sad.
Daniel,
She said,
you don't think highly of your dad, do you? I wish I had pushed him to spend time with you when you were younger. I'm sorry.
I had never tried to hide my feelings about my dad, but hearing my mom express her sorrow like that left me at a loss for words. She shouldn't have to feel this way. My dad's messiness, his lack of common sense, and his indifference to the family, all of it was on him. It's okay, Mom. You don't have to apologize. To me, it's the same whether Dad's around or not. I don't need anything from him. Don't worry about it, I said, a bit more harshly than I intended. Every time I saw my mom's sad face, my anger towards my dad resurfaced. The atmosphere turned awkward, and I packed up my study materials and retreated to my room. Several days later, on a school holiday, I decided to visit a large bookstore a little further away. The trip involved an hour-long train ride. When my mom offered to accompany me, I assured her, I'm already in 8th grade, I'll be fine, and went on my own. This was my first time traveling so far alone by train. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but the exhilaration of feeling like a grown-up outweighed my apprehensions. After a 1-hour train ride, I alighted at a magnificent station far grander than our local one. I consulted the station's map and the notes on my phone, then headed towards the bookstore. About 5 minutes into my walk, I noticed the construction site for a high-rise building, and to my surprise, the name of my dad's company was displayed prominently. Even so far from home, I wished I could escape thoughts of my dad. However, without realizing it, I found myself stopping and staring at the construction site. Suddenly, from high above, I thought I heard a familiar booming voice. Looking up, I could see 3 figures, but from this distance, their faces were indistinct. Yet, something about the movements of one of them felt unmistakably familiar. Having lived with my dad for 14 years, I couldn't possibly mistake his demeanor. As I focused more, I began to discern my dad's figure more clearly. He was in his usual dirty work clothes, tethered securely with safety ropes, and wearing a helmet that smeared his face with dirt. I had never before witnessed my dad at work. At home, he often seemed idle, but here he was, transforming into a completely different person, working diligently and energetically. Much to my chagrin, I found myself thinking, he looks cool. I could never muster the courage to climb such towering heights, yet there he was, fearlessly and confidently working. The reason for his always dirty appearance dawned on me. He had no time to care about his looks, being engrossed in such a demanding work environment. His tendency to drink and lounge around on his days off was probably his way of unwinding from the intense pressures of his job. And although he dealt with such grueling work, he never once complained at home. Instead, he would often laugh, perhaps trying to shield us from the harsh realities of his job. His cheerfulness was possibly his way of showing kindness to us, ensuring that we remained oblivious to his hardships. My father wasn't a slacker, not in the slightest. I had been viewing him through a very narrow lens, basing my opinions on just a fraction of what he truly was. Thinking it doesn't matter whether he's there or not was an unjust evaluation of him. Here he was, engaged in a job so perilous that it necessitated lifelines, working to protect and provide for our family. All I could do was stand frozen, processing this revelation. And for reasons I couldn't understand, tears began to stream down my face. I was in the middle of the street, vulnerable to the gaze of passersby. Looking down would only allow more tears to fall, so I looked up once more towards where my father was. From this distance, he appeared tiny against the vast backdrop of the sky. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound respect for him. I also felt a deep shame for not having recognized his worth earlier. Noticing that he was about to descend from the high-rise, I decided to leave. I didn't want him to see me crying like this. I stopped by the bookstore and bought the book I had wanted, but the excitement of reading it on the train ride back home had vanished. My thoughts were preoccupied by the image of my father, working tirelessly high above the ground. I resolved to etch that image into my heart. Up until now, I had never seriously contemplated my future. I just studied, aiming to get into a good school, and then hope to secure a job at a reputable company. I believed that doing so would eventually allow me to provide for and ensure the happiness of the family I would one day have. But is that the path to happiness for me and my future family? Witnessing my father's dedication made me question my previously held notions about success and happiness. No matter how prestigious a company I might join, if I don't have pride in what I do, I might end up becoming a father who constantly complains at home, just like I previously perceived my dad. I want to be someone who, regardless of their job, feels proud of what they do. Someone who, even in challenging situations, shows resilience and kindness with a smile. That's what I realized that day. I was surprised at how easily my perspective could be swayed, but on this day, I decided to change the goal I was aiming for. I want to be like my father. I resolved. I want to be like the man who, with all his might, risked his life for us. I'm sure if I told my father this, he'd immediately object, saying,
Don't become like me.
but I've made up my mind. No matter what anyone says, this is the path I want to pursue. However, this decision remains a secret from my father. I've realized that there's an allure in a man who doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve. While I don't know exactly where my path will lead, I'm determined to be someone who chooses their own way, takes pride in their work, and lives with integrity. And maybe, just maybe, the day will come when I can share a drink with my father, discussing work, life, and everything in between as equals. Then, surely, he won't say things like,
Going out with me wouldn't be fun, right?
anymore. With that thought in mind and looking forward to such a day, I resolved to give it my all.